and race from the same place that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region for we woman and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean and the Caribbean and the Caribbean.
Oh, welcome to today's edition of Politics 101, our open word edition. Welcome wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from in Guyana or outside of Guyana. Welcome to those of you who are joining us from Europe, particularly those of you in the United Kingdom and France. I think there's a critical mass of you there who join this program and similar programs. We of course are grateful to you. Lots happening in Guyana. The teachers' issue is now before the courts again. The government, of course, backed down from its commitment, backed away from its commitment to dealing with the teachers' issue from 2019, having originally agreed. They then backed away from that, and so the talks have collapsed, as you know, and the matter is back before the courts. The United Nations Human Rights Committee has been holding hearings on accusations about human rights violations in Guyana. Quite riveting. The government, of course, has been forced to defend itself, and it is not doing such a good job. They've been grilled on corruption. They've been grilled on discrimination, ethnic discrimination. They've been grilled on extrajudicial killing, and they've been grilled on SARA. And Professor Thomas headed SARA, and so we're going to be talking to him, asking him about the SARA experience, revisiting it, if you will, because as soon as the government came in, one of the first things they did was to close down SARA, and now we have on the international stage they're being questioned about SARA. So that those hearings were something else. The way in which the committee, the panel, so informed on what's happening in Guyana. We are also looking at what's happening across the Caribbean in Haiti. The conflict, the problems in Haiti continue there. And the question is, what kind of solution? And the spotlight, of course, is on CARICOM, and people have been raising concerns about CARICOM's role, the duplicity of CARICOM, the way in which they've treated Haitian immigrants, and people are asking whether, in fact, they truly have the Haitians' interests at heart. And of course, on the oil and gas front, the squabble between Exxon and Chevron, and over that merger of Chevron and Hess, it continues. We are never going to be able to escape the oil and gas issue. That's where we are. We are a petrol state, and we can't avoid it. We have problems, of course, on how it is approached. I have had cause to mention on this program on more than one occasion that I'm in sympathy with some of those who are advocating, who are taking a nationalist position in relation to oil and gas. But I find that, it's too they're picking and choosing what issues to go after. And there is no really overall a cohesive a critique of the oil and gas industry, of our rise as a petro state. And so therefore, one does not always get a sense that we are making headway in that regard. You know, the environmentalists are over there, and those who are fighting for a better contract over there, and all that stuff, and we don't seem to have a kind of focus critique of what is happening. And so therefore we are not able sometimes to offer the kind of alternative policies that is demanded at this time. Welcome to those of you who are joining us. We continue to get a lot of good comments, especially on this open word edition, because we're dealing with policy, we're dealing with economics, we're dealing with oil and gas, and we have been getting a lot of response, and I want you all to keep those responses coming in. A lot of Professor Thomas's old students. I want to acknowledge those of you who have made contact with us and to say thanks for what we are doing. And I want to encourage you to continue listening to the program, viewing the program, and to offer your suggestions and your comments where necessary. So I think let's go. We have Dr. Canterbury and Dr. Thomas who are ready to roll. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to another edition of Open Word.
Good evening. Have you heard me? Good evening.
Yes, Professor Thomas, we're...
Good evening, David and CY.
Right.
Good evening.
Yeah, lots happening. Let's start with what's happening on the oil and gas front. We see the squabble there with Exxon and Chevron continuing, and it's now gone to another level. Professor Thomas, bring us up to speed with that discussion and how Guyana fits into that discussion, because at a certain level, it appears as though it's a squabble between two big companies who just happen to have investments in Guyana, and it's not our business.
In many ways, that's the literal truth.
Yes.
Because we have not tried to take a stand on the real interest that we have in this matter, because it is our oil really that is at stake. But the government has not tried to lay out a position in regards to Guyana and the controversy. But what I have been arguing in this program so far is that the market signal that this incident sends is the most important consequence for us, because it signals that we are, in fact, a truly world-class oil-producing power on the rise. And what has been happening is not a mirage, that there is a real strength in this position that Guyana finds itself in. And it reinforces the need for us to get out of this particular set of possibilities that we have well ahead of the game, where we begin to remove any vestige of poverty remaining a significant feature of our existence, particularly income poverty, as is the case today, and that we support basic income schemes, and that we try to develop or pursue a trajectory of development based on planning, good policy, good programs, that we conceive and construct based on the possibilities that are available to Guyana, and inherently using the full West Indian diaspora arrangement as the platform on which we do that building. That's my vision for where we should go going. I think if we do that, we can contribute towards building a very vibrant and sustaining set of communities within the Western Hemisphere, and we play a significant role in the future evolution of the global environment.
Clive, let me.
A sort of Middle East plus arrangement, set of arrangements emanating out of Guyana.
Yeah. Let me take you back in order to come forward. In the 1960s and 70s, you were part of that New World group that had begun to think about development in the Caribbean and coming up with policies and approaches to development. And in many respects, I think in some countries like Jamaica, for example, some of the issues that were raised by yourself and other scholars during the Manley period, for example, some of those issues were experimented with, for want of a better term. But link for us that trajectory by the New World back then and this windfall that Guyana is having now, because you talk about the West Indian, the Caribbean trajectory. Link those early forays into developmental plans and developmental policies, developmental trajectory. Link those to Guyana's oil windfall now for us.
I think that any objective look at where Guyana stands now, it has the same set of central weaknesses of any other country in the Caribbean region. Mm-hmm. It is by far too small. It does not have a large enough, or the capacity for having a large enough market to be a self-generating economic motor. It has to rely on international trade. It has to rely on international investment. It has to rely on international technology. It has to, in other words, become a hub within the global existences that we have. And that hub needs a basic platform. What we were trying to do is to establish that the minimum basis for such a platform, of which you could build a future for the region, is West Indian integration. So the integration movement was never an alternative to national development. It was the essence of trying to create a foundational platform of which to build the possibilities of a future development. We'd still be small, even though when we all are united, because the countries are all basically very small. In fact, the largest landmass is really Guyana. And now we've had the possibilities of oil. It means that we also have the largest scope for natural resources. So the idea was to sell the notion that integrated Caribbean was a necessary condition for any possibilities for developing. That is why I keep bringing it back into this debate. Because at this point in time, efforts are being made. But I think the efforts are largely pro forma. Mm-hmm. They're what you would expect and what you would do. But we need to have something more than that. We need to have a national commitment in which people, I was not literally make pledges, but in a sense, the political process and the leadership of it pledges that would never conceive of the development of the region other than as an integrated whole. And we need to bring in the resources that exist in other territories. We need to create this platform because we need to engage in international trade. and a small supplier of goods, no matter how plentiful we have, or how bountiful is the natural resources that we find, would never be able to sustainably go forward and have a comfortable basis for life and expansion of their own humanity among the peoples that live there, unless we have an integrated Caribbean that meets a minimal configuration. I would say of the entire basic Caribbean area that wishes to be integrated at and around this point in time. That's how I would see it.
That's how you see
And
it.
that's why I keep saying that the windfall is a good for the region. And the more I'm exposed indirectly and through other means, other than direct means to business, to the entrepreneurial class in the region, I'm convinced that we have the capacity for extraordinarily creative entrepreneurs, innovators, and business people throughout this entire region. I'm amazed by the capacity and skills.
Mhm.
I've seen them very intimately through certain connections and advice I give to different forms and different bodies in the region. And I know the talent is there, so that I'm not fearful that we won't have the possibilities of doing it. What they, in fact, are not sure of is that they can say that they have a right to those resources. So I'd like us to be in a position where we can say, look, we got these resources and we pledge them to the region. We would not be keeping national resource funds in any North American bank, particularly US, at a 0.25% interest. And we would, as much as we can, support the entrepreneurs of this region leading the charge in developing these possibilities that we have for a better future for the rest of the Caribbean region. So the foundation stone has to be integration.
Integration. Dennis, our generation, of course, are students of CY's generation, and we cut our teeth on the politics of protest, the politics of resistance, fighting for against authoritarianism, authoritarian rule, and so forth. Now, 40 years later, we are here dealing with a Guyana that has this windfall that is now a petrol state. How do we as protest people, as people who come out of that Guyanese and Caribbean left-wing protest movement, how do we now treat with this new development, this new transition to a petrol state?
Now, David, I think that the first thing we have to be level-headed and sober-headed and to think about this thing in a very careful way. And if we listen carefully to what CY said just now, we see that those are the very issues that we have to be dealing with. In fact, the issue should be at the political level, at the social level, at the economic level, because in essence, we're talking about how to use this bounty to transform the political, social, economic structures of the society, how to use this bounty to transform the power structure in the society such that the classes or the groups that might take advantage of this particular situation to develop entrepreneurial skills, develop businesses, etc., that they don't have us in the same position that we're in today, even though we have plenty. So the struggle, to my mind, has to be at the regional level, as CY said, and it also has to be about how do we transform the power structures in the region and in a country like Guyana, such that we could have more democracy being reflected within the political arena, within the economic arena, paying attention to things like poverty, paying attention to things like gender, and also including the aged. How do we deal with our elderly? All of those are issues that we could use the plenty to tackle. And I think that if you were to break down the notion of the regional integration, there is no reason why countries like Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Suriname. I noticed that there is something now with Brazil, Guyana, and Suriname working together. But why can't we have like the free Caribbean countries, like and plus Brazil, focusing on how we could use the resources that we have to push the regional integration and to be able to transform this society and not just transform it so that the rich can get richer and the poor get poorer, but transform it in a fundamental way, fundamental transformation, so that working class people could see a way up. Because in the final analysis, in all the wealth that we have, it serves us no good if people are going to go to bed hungry, if teachers are not going to be able to get a livable wage, if the working man in the agricultural sector or working in industry unemployed, those people have to be taken care of. So I think that the focus has to be how to make working people better off. And we can't have a system where the rich getting all of this money and we, the workers, working for them, but we still can't make ends meet. So that's what I think that's the first thing they need to tackle.
The first thing that we need to tackle. See why? You, Dennis, all of us, we come out of the left wing tradition in the Caribbean, the progressive wing of Caribbean politics and economics. And as I hinted in my question to Dennis, that we are usually seen as protest people, as resistance people. And we have now moved into this new era of petrostate. How do we as left-wing progressive people, how do we treat with this new dispensation? What do we bring to this new dispensation? How can we advance this dispensation in a real progressive way, as Dennis is saying, in a way to realize our dreams, our hopes of power for the working people, to move them from the poor and powerless to a state where they're out of poverty and where they're empowered?
Well, I think the first thing that becomes obvious from what Dennis has said is that the institution, above all institutions, which will have to take the lead, is the state. There's no doubt about that, because we don't have the classes and groups that are powerful enough to have self-generated development or to tackle these problems on their own. So I'm placing a lot of emphasis on the state. But by placing emphasis on the state, we have to place emphasis on the democratic state. And this is where the leverage that he talks about concerning the distribution of wealth, the distribution of income and all these other issues, employment and so forth, have to play a very primary role in what is happening. So I expect all those influences to be operating and to be felt through that particular process. The way in which the state reorganized for the express purpose of developing the possibilities for people to have a comfortable livelihood and a comfortable existence and to become full citizens in every way in which you can imagine it, would have to express itself So that's the first condition I think that we need to explain. The second condition, which I hinted at, is that we need a business class. I don't want to call it business, but it need not be private business. It could be social business.
Mhm.
But you need an entrepreneurial class who are willing to take risk, look at rewards and allocate through risk, and therefore operate in areas that are putting at risk the resources of the state. And that class, I think, exists. It may be now it's being driven by the opportunities for mobilization from private capital, but I think it can also be motivated through the creation of opportunities through state capital. So I can see a state capitalist class developing too, which supports that role and which is invigorated with the creativity of younger people, entrepreneurial type people who populate that state and do things to try to make the region a better region. So I'm not as pessimistic as it might appear by just listing where we start.
Mhm.
Um, so I think the continuation of those factors have to be built upon. And trying to construct a state of that type, you have to go pretty far. You have to change the laws. You have to change people's entitlements. You have to change the position people hold in society. You have to differentiate between rights and obligations, both of the state to the people and the people to the state. You have, in other words, the right get involved in a building a constitution and a structure of a state that is like none we ever had before, at least in Guyana,
Mhm.
that I know of. Some elements are possibly here in places like Barbados, with a certain notion of a social good and a coming together of people to the state may be more obvious. But all those things have to be done. That's the route I would take.
Yes. See why you mentioned that C word twice, capitalism. To talk about state capitalism and so on. How do we contend with capitalism? What should be our attitude to the notion of capitalism? We come out of the non-capitalist path, to quote a tendency that you were very much part of. How do we contend with capitalism in this era of the petro state?
Where we need our entrepreneurs, and we need a political class that develops the state. Be very foresightful to see beyond the horizon. So really chart a course of where we want Guyana to go. This doesn't end the need for creative leadership or creative thought. It just opens up the starting point. But a new type of creativity.
A new type of creativity, a new type of creativity. Dennis, come in here, because we are grappling with notions such as the environment and how we treat with the environment versus using oil and gas as a means of development. We are grappling with a kind of nationalism as opposed to the power of foreign multinational corporations. We are grappling with the whole issue of development via infrastructure as opposed to development of human beings. How do we navigate these seemingly contending developments in the era of the petro state?
You see, David.
Yes, sir.
This whole notion of that the question you posed to CY, I think the key is to make people comfortable in the final analysis. What you want to have is a society in which there is bread and justice, a society in which the people feel empowered by way of their participation in the political process and political processes, by way of their participation in an economy. You also have to have a situation in which people feel that they, and this is see why I said has to do with legislations, etc., and the state, the way how they might be able to determine the resources and how they allocate them within the society in terms of who produce, who gets what, where and how. So those are the real fundamental questions with respect to what is necessary, I think, as distinct from merely sort of placing labels on things. And so without labeling, the key objective is to make people um, transform the lives of working people. That's the key. Now, in terms of so the petro state is a state with the as we know, oil and gas. And if they're making money, you have to use this thing. You have to produce this oil and the gas if you're endowed with it. But then the key is what you do with what you have when you get this money. And again, as CY pointed out, you look at the state. The question is not, to my mind, the question is when you study what capitalism is, the way how it's being defined as in terms of the production of surplus value and appropriation surplus value, you can have a state that can regulate the production through private entrepreneurs and still take care of the question of how the surplus is redistributed. So that's what we have to do, have a society in which we can redistribute the surplus in a way that people don't go to bed hungry. People are able to go out and vote and do their politics in the way they see it. Now, I think though that they in terms of how we were to how we might arrive at such a position, we cannot arrive at such a position if we take up some of the arguments that some people have, for example, that you might stop producing oil. Because if you stop producing oil, then you wouldn't have the resources to distribute. You see, the question is not to stop producing the oil, but to produce the oil in a manner in which you can actually help to redistribute the proceeds from it such that working people could benefit the most. So those arguments that you raised about the environment just now, etc., they're important. They're very important arguments. But then we have to balance the thing out to see whether you would stop producing or you would produce in a manner. I don't want to appear to be saying we should produce the oil in a manner that is compatible with the market, or I don't want to be using the same jargons we get from some international institutions. I'm saying that we could find creative ways in our own society to try as much to influence the process by which the oil is produced, because frankly, we don't really have no say in what's happening in that industry. These are people on the outside doing this, and our little say is going to be because we're so small and we don't have the power, we don't have much say in this. So because we don't have much say, we're going to be very much constrained in terms of how much we can influence the way the oil is produced and how, but we have a full say over how we would distribute what we get from the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And by having that say from what we get from the process, that's how we could then begin to shape a state that can help to redistribute what we get in such a manner that would help working people.
Professor Thomas, the teachers' strike and the subsequent developments, I think, are a test of the state and labor relations, industrial relations in the new era of the petro state. I think it's a real test of how do we treat, how does the state treat with labor in this era of the petro state? What are some of the early lessons we are seeing here?
I think very unfortunately the lessons are the wrong ones.
There you go.
We see a state that is bullying,
Mm-hmm.
a state that is intransigent, a state that is prepared to be uncaring, a state that wants to perpetuate a low wage, a state that in the midst of all this opportunity cannot think creatively of how they can pay for the period of the last 3 or 4 years when COVID ran rampant in Guyana, and we were unable to pay teachers what they were due, even though we have had a $1 trillion budget, which happens to be the first we ever have had in our history. So I think with all those things, we have negative lessons to learn. And it's shameful because I get the impression that the state side is trying to show the teachers that they can't get away with any improvement in their living conditions once they remain as the appropriators of the national resource fund.
Clive,
I fear a long struggle.
Yeah, go ahead, continue, CY.
No, I fear a long struggle, and at the bottom of it means that the students are losing, and ultimately that's going to take a toll.
CY, aren't you worried? And I think this, I know the answer, but I still am going to pose the question to you because I want you to develop on it. This whole notion that public servants, teachers, are not producers of wealth, and so therefore should be treated in a certain kind of way. I'm screwing my face up because
I never thought I'd live to hear that argument again.
There you go. You took it out of my mouth. I was born in a Guyana that I never thought I would hear government. Go ahead, CY.
It is very shameful. And it shows the poverty of vision. The poverty of vision that this leadership of the country exhibits. It's a damning comment on what we have produced. A truly damning comment. And a teacher is not productive because you don't see the shoes or the bananas.
Yeah. Dennis Canterbury, I want you to come in here because I see why said, I never thought I would live to hear a government of Guyana characterize teachers and public servants in such a way.
Yeah, I think I know where that idea is coming from.
Tell me.
It's not only arrogance, but I think it's how they were trained, because that idea came from a certain section in the literature where they believe that people who do services don't produce anything, and that clearly is not the case, because the people who are engaged in services such as teaching, etc.
That's pre-cave
exactly.
existence.
It's that's not so, and I think that it shows clearly that they're out of touch, with the reality. And it might not even be that they're out of touch. It might just be that they just want to fabricate and produce arguments just to spite the teachers, to say, look, you can't get, you don't really do any work, and therefore it sounds like the kind of slave master who would work you to death and then say you don't do any work, give you more whipping, and say you're not working. But so the strike really is to the question you posed to CY originally, is like they want to show that they're working, that they're caring. Because when you listen to what they're saying in their propaganda pieces, they're saying that it's the best budget ever for the working people, for the working class. They're supporting the working people. But really the labor, the people who labor in Guyana, the workers, they're nowhere better off in this budget. They're nowhere better off, and this is reflected in how they're responding to the strike. People are nowhere better off, working people are nowhere better off with the government, this current government, despite of what they say that they are indeed pro-workers. How could they be pro-workers when you don't want to pay them over legitimate issues, a legitimate strike, and then at the same time fabricating all of these things that, oh, you don't produce the rate, you don't produce.
But is it fabrication, Dennis, or is it coming from a particular belief system that has grown in the ranks of the PPP and perhaps in the wider society?
Well,
a lot of ignorance is there.
Yeah, I don't know if the wider society, I would say in the PPP.
Well, yes, in the PPP, but I mean, you hear some young people who, for example, parrot the PPP nonsense. Boy, we have development. We have development. So there is a kind of individualism that is creeping in the ranks of some young professionals and so on, who seem to be buying into that PPP's partly ignorance, but that ignorance seems to be grounded in a kind of cave ideology, or as PCY say, pre-cave ideology. Anyhow, go ahead, Dennis.
No, so I think that they it shows clearly that the people who are claiming that workers, the teachers, don't produce any value, they miss the point. Because what about us? We are all their products, and then we have all those other products. And then you go on to become engineers, you go on to produce real concrete products, as we are in the process of production. But I was saying earlier that the government doesn't really, it would seem that what they're saying as that they're pro-workers doesn't match with their actions. So there's a disjunction between what they say and what they do. Because if they were really pro-workers, it's not only the teachers, but all those struggling people in Guyana, you would actually try to give them a universal basic income, those who are not working especially. And those who are working, you would increase their level of income so that at least you won't have to give them a universal basic income because their level is high. And those who are unemployed, you bring them up. I think that part of the issue with them is, and I know CY, you might be able to comment on this, the pursuit of is there any benefit to pursuing full employment policy where you...
The problem, I believe, resides in the notion that we have in Guyana, or the situation we find ourselves in which most of the poor are employed, or a significant section of the employed poor, employed in low-wage jobs, portering, guarding, clerical, that type of work, both in the public and the private sector. So one of the things that we try to do with the basic income, which is what I'm including in the summary final column as highlighting, is to set up an opportunity to fight against low-wage labor in Guyana. Because the system is structured to produce employed poor.
Mhm.
It's structured to produce a whole set of cleaners and washers of windows and runners of errands and watchmen, people who get very little income because they think they're not doing very productive jobs. And if you can excuse it away by saying that they got a job at least, but the employed poor constitutes a significant part of Guyana's poor. So
Mhm.
once you have a basic income, what you do is make people feel that the reserve price of their labor can go up. You don't have to take the job because the reserve income you will get will be probably more than what you get for guarding or washing windows or running errands. And that puts a pressure on the wage rate. Those are
Yeah.
means by which we indirectly try to foster the well-being of workers. And this is what the points I make in this essay that I'm writing now.
Yeah, so because what's going to happen indeed is that once the people are once this income is paid, the universal basic income, it would have a
You
tendency.
don't work, you don't want to work for less.
Yeah, it would push wages upwards,
Yeah.
and so the overall
Because the reserve price for
economy,
labor rises.
right, right. So that's the thing, and so then perhaps and then when you when you combine that policy with the policy of generating
CBI.
producing, yeah, then when you combine them, then you lift
The wages of everybody
of
and
everybody. Yeah,
support the redistribution of income. That's the whole sneaky purpose here. But we don't
right,
want to betray too many of those secrets.
right.
You know, we have had the experience of petrol states going off into areas of authoritarianism, dictatorship,
Yeah.
and so forth. And so it raises the question of democracy. Now, the struggle for democracy is a constant struggle. I reference CY's Rise of the Authoritarian State, which was published in 1984, and which I think is still relevant in terms of trying to understand state formation in the post-colonial Caribbean. I still use it in my classes because I think that it has remained relevant, and the state in many ways has not been transformed in our Caribbean. But as we move into the petrol state and we see the kind of hyper authoritarianism, CY, the hyper authoritarianism, is it that we are seeing a new state formation, or we are seeing really a heightened form of the authoritarianism that you so deftly described and analyzed 40 years ago?
So it can be either or both.
Okay.
I'm not ruling out one or the other, but I do note that states that have that characteristic of being deemed petrol states are pretty belligerent.
Mhm.
They always end up in wars, or they feel that the oil intoxicates them, and the people who run the state feel very empowered, are very powerful, and they're pretty abrasive in the relationship with other groups. You will see a lot of that in the Middle East.
Mhm.
But one way in which I think the Middle East has distinguished itself is that the Emirati and those other indigenous peoples, the peoples of their own native environment, they've treated them very well and distributed income to them. It's the people who come in to labor on behalf of those states are the ones where the privation and so on, the discrimination, the hostility and so on, and the abuse of working conditions thereby.
Yeah.
And that is what we got to be fearful of in Guyana. That we created a two-class system where migrant workers do the menial work, and the local workers are given a rung up the ladder, and exploitation continues for the migrant workers. That's a real possibility because some of the wages that these workers would work for, our own workers will soon stop wanting to work for that.
Yeah.
Yes. See why quickly let's at the hearing last week in front of the United Nations Human Rights Commission in Geneva, and Guyana was being grilled on a number of issues, but one issue that came up was the issue of SARA, state asset recovery. And as I said in the introduction, the government closed down SARA when it came into office in 2020. And so for all intents and purposes, as far as they're concerned, the issue was closed. But here, the matter is being raised from a human rights standpoint. And Minister Teixeira answered by saying that the state asset recovery is being carried out by the police and by Kanu. And she was pressed on what they recovered, and she couldn't answer very much. Are you surprised that?
No, I'm not surprised because we inherited that same argument when we tried to form class SARA.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is a little more complicated than it might appear at first sight. SARA was moving to a position where we could have been self-sustaining. And that was necessary because we were not getting the state support that we thought we needed. But it was clear from the way in which we operated with the international community and the regional community that we were highly thought of and we enjoyed a lot of support. A lot of support. We were let into a lot of areas of confidence that were very important for the future of Guyana. And I think that we would have soon have reached a point where just some more prohibitive activities and basic things like stopping gold smuggling or money laundering and things like that would have been enough for us not to have to depend on the state. And then we could become a truly independent agency. And maybe we prioritize that a bit early. But that was the goal.
That was the goal. And do you think that state has
we were scrupulous in treating every Guyanese with respect. We were, I would say, exemplary in giving everybody the benefit of being treated as innocent and until proven guilty. But we had lots in the work.
Do you think that state asset recovery and the need for a SARA, as you conceived it, is still necessary?
I think so. And I think I would make one change. And the change is to put the onus of on the persons who are alleged to have broken the law to justify their innocence on some of these matters, particularly when they're state officials.
Dennis, you
Rather
have
the other way around, yeah.
Yeah. Dennis, you have the last say.
Yeah, I think that they I noticed from those hearings there that they're actually saying that you could actually investigate and possibly prosecute some individuals in the government, in this present government, because there was a failure to investigate them, and that why there is this failure to investigate them, and they should actually be investigated.
I don't know if they look at our files.
Yeah.
I don't know, because nobody's contacted me ever. I just left the files there.
I also noticed that they're saying that the police and Kanu are now carrying out that function that perhaps that the SARA carried out.
We had a lot of training. We had 2 years of really extensive training among the staff.
Mm-hmm.
We were equipping ourselves that were very highly thought of within the international community.
Mm-hmm. Professor Clive Thomas, Dr. Dennis Canterbury, here today on another edition of Open Word, dealing with a number of issues that are relevant to our ongoing struggle in Guyana to make sense of where we are and where we are going. We focus today on the petro state because it's a real thing. It's real. Guyana is changing. Not necessarily in a transformational way, but it's changing. And on this program, we have always acknowledged that change. And our analysis of the situation starts from that standpoint. We are in a petro state. There's no doubt about that. And
David, the change is unparalleled historically, because we're the fastest growing petro state in history.
You heard it from Professor Thomas. The change is unparalleled in history. The fastest.
Remember, we found our oil and our first oil was in 2019.
Yeah.
December.
So we're not even 5 years.
Yeah.
And we are growing at an astronomical rate. And it is bringing all the contradictions in our society. We talked about it today. We talked about the teachers' strike as a test of how the petro state is treating with labor. And as we all say, we are embarrassed. We continue to critique what is happening. We continue to offer solutions. We continue to put before you, the Guyanese people, another way. There is still hope. And we are saying that once the people of Guyana get involved in what is going on, then we are going to be able, in the long run, to stop the runaway trade. I want to thank you, Dr. Canterbury, Dr. Thomas. Thank you all again for coming through on another edition of Open Word.
Thank you.
And thank you, the viewers, because without you, there is no program. I'll catch you all again tomorrow for another edition of Politics 101. Same time, same place. And remember, as always, love is the watchword.
One race from the same place that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region. For we women and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean and the Caribbean and the Caribbean.